37 claimed victims, impossible ciphers that literally mocked the police. And then, he just vanishes into the California fog. How does the most infamous phantom killer in American history just walk away? Well, welcome to the ultimate unsolved mystery.
I like killing people because it is so much fun. Man is the most dangerous animal of all. These aren't just chilling words. They are the exact misspelled confessions of a murderer who treated the San Francisco Bay Area like his own personal hunting ground.
Welcome to this explainer on the Zodiac Killer. Today, we're not just analyzing a masterclass in psychological terror, we're launching an investigation into a cold case that has haunted law enforcement, cryptographers, and amateur sleuths for over 50 years. We're going to break down the verified timeline, the absolutely maddening forensic roadblocks, and the massive contradictions that keep this investigation alive today.
Okay, let's dive into this. The Phantom in the Bay and his trail of terror in Northern California.
To really understand the Zodiac, we have to follow the trail of blood he left across the state. Who were his actual victims, and how did his violent methods evolve? Between December 1968 and October 1969, he officially claimed 5 lives, though 2 victims miraculously survived. It all started out on Lake Herman Road, targeting high schoolers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen in a remote turnout. 6 months later, he strikes Blue Rock Springs, then Lake Berryessa. But look closely at October 11, 1969. The killer abruptly shifts his entire pattern, executing a lone cab driver, Paul Stine, right in the heart of a wealthy San Francisco neighborhood.
This shifting target profile is what made him so incredibly terrifying. He was completely erratic. He evolved. He started in isolated lovers' lanes with a point-blank .22 caliber rifle. Then he switches to a 9mm. At Lake Berryessa, he struck in broad daylight wearing this bizarre, hand-sewn executioner's hood, binding and stabbing his victims. And finally, he murders a man in a dense urban environment, casually wipes down the cab, and just walks away into the night.
But here is the thing. The physical violence? That was just the warm-up. The killer didn't just want to murder, he wanted an audience. And he was about to launch a psychological war on the entire West Coast. Just days after the San Francisco murder, the media received a chilling letter. I am the murderer of the taxi driver. I have killed 7 people. And to prove it, he didn't just offer details only the killer would know. He actually included a blood-stained swatch of Paul Stine's torn shirt. This wasn't some elaborate prank. The monster was real, and he desperately wanted the spotlight.
Which brings us to ciphers, taunts, and terror, the ultimate game of cat and mouse.
Now, what's really interesting about this next piece is the sheer arrogance of his media manipulation. It turned a local tragedy into a national obsession. This is the infamous Z13 cipher, mailed in April 1970. It literally begins with the horrifying tease, "My name is," followed by 13 bizarre symbols. Just 13 characters separating the police from a serial killer. And because of its extreme brevity, it remains completely unsolved to this very day.
You see, the Zodiac didn't just scribble random shapes. He created highly sophisticated codes. He used what's known as a homophonic substitution cipher. In a normal code, 1 letter equals 1 symbol, right? But the Zodiac assigned multiple unique symbols to high-frequency letters. This completely flattens the statistical patterns. He knew exactly how to make cryptanalysts pull their hair out, turning his murders into a sick, twisted puzzle. In fact, his longest unsolved message, the 340-character Z340 cipher, was so complex it resisted the greatest minds at the FBI, the CIA, and the NSA for 51 years. Just think about that for a second. A lone killer in the 1960s created a code so impenetrable it literally took a modern international team of mathematics using specialized decryption software to finally crack it in December 2020. No way a normal person pulls that off.
The guy was a textbook narcissist, turning real-life murder into performance art. I mean, he demanded his ciphers be printed on the front pages of newspapers, or else he'd go on a killing spree. He threatened to blow up a school bus full of children. He sent in hand-drawn crosshair maps, pointing to alleged bomb locations, and openly referenced pop culture, like the movie The Most Dangerous Game. He completely paralyzed the Bay Area with fear, creating the exact blueprint for how modern killers manipulate the 24-hour news cycle.
Let's move on and see how this builds to the prime suspect, the curious case of Arthur Lee Allen.
So the crucial point is, with all this physical correspondence and surviving witnesses, you'd think the police had a suspect. And they did, Arthur Lee Allen. But here's the massive, frustrating contradiction. On one hand, the circumstantial evidence is completely overwhelming. The guy literally wore a Zodiac brand watch. A surviving victim, Michael Maggio, identified him in a photo lineup. He was found with bloody knives in his car after the Lake Berryessa attack. He even bragged to friends about shooting couples in lovers' lanes. But then you look at the cold hard forensics. His DNA did not match the partial profile from the stamps, his fingerprints weren't a match, top document experts completely ruled out his handwriting, even his voice didn't match the police dispatch recordings.
Police were absolutely convinced they had their man. They served him with multiple search warrants. But the science, it told a completely different story. And this massive contradiction remains the gaping hole at the center of the Zodiac mystery today.
And honestly, Alan wasn't the only one who looked great on paper but failed the scientific test. Look at this list. Gary Francis Post had forehead wrinkles perfectly matching the famous police sketch, but zero physical links. Ross Sullivan worked right near a suspected early murder and wore the exact same combat boots found at the scene, but no DNA match. Lawrence Kane actually had Navy cryptographic training, but again, no prints matched. Every single time a compelling suspect emerges, the hard forensic science just shoots the theory down.
So let's talk about the forensic roadblocks. Why didn't they catch him?
You really have to remember that the late 1960s was a vastly different time for policing. The Zodiac's attacks crossed 4 distinct county lines. There were no centralized computer databases. Local police departments operated in these totally isolated silos. Institutional rivalries and egos literally blocked the sharing of physical evidence. And because the crimes didn't cross state lines, the FBI lacked the legal jurisdiction to step in and unify the investigation. It's a phenomenon called jurisdictional balkanization, and the killer exploited it perfectly. In fact, this catastrophic failure is exactly why we have centralized national police databases today.
And this brilliantly illustrates the other real enemy. It wasn't just city limits, it was the technology of the era. Biological evidence degraded rapidly at those outdoor crime scenes. The microscopes of the 1960s couldn't sequence trace hair or fibers. The latent fingerprints they did manage to find lifted from a heavily contaminated public taxi that had seen dozens of passengers that day. And when they finally tried early DNA testing decades later, it was extracted from the outside of postage stamps, making it highly susceptible to touch contamination from generations of postal workers and journalists.
Which naturally leads us to the ultimate question, the one you are probably asking yourself right now. What about modern DNA? Can't we just find his distant relatives using genetic databases, exactly like they did to catch the Golden State Killer?
Will science solve it? Let's take a look at the search for the Zodiac's DNA.
Here is the incredibly frustrating scientific reality we're facing today. See, the Golden State Killer left behind abundant, high-quality nuclear DNA at his crime scenes. The Zodiac did not. The partial profile we do have from those stamps is highly questionable because of contamination, and to use modern forensic genetic genealogy, investigators need a clean, high-density SNP profile to find relatives. A tiny, degraded snippet just isn't enough to build a reliable family tree.
Without a clean, uncontaminated genetic profile, his identity remains buried in the past. It's a tragic irony, really. The definitive evidence we need today, well, it might have been destroyed by the very people trying to solve the case over the last half-century. Which leaves us staring at the most frustrating cliffhanger in true crime history. Will a sudden breakthrough in modern science finally unmask the Zodiac? Or will his true name remain the ultimate unsolved cipher?